Hey everyone, this week we're talking about the hidden system controlling every photo you take, metering. So I've come out to Ladybower Reservoir this evening and I'm going to capture a sunset shot. And along the way I'm going to talk about a feature that you might not think about too often, but it's actually vitally important to capture a well-exposed image. So let's crack on, I'll get some images and we'll talk more about the hidden system, which is metering. Okay, so I'm back home now. Light was fading fast when I was out at Ladybower and I really wanted to maximise my chances of getting good images during golden hour, so I thought I'd do all my talking sections back here. So first and foremost, what is metering? Well, back in the days of film photography, before cameras started getting really clever, people would use devices similar to this to measure the amount of light coming into their cameras. And there are different types of light meter, which is what this is. But we're going to talk today solely about the type that have since been built into modern cameras. And that's the type that will measure the reflected light from your scene or subject coming back into the camera. And if you're only familiar with modern digital cameras, you may know this as the camera's metering system. So like I said, that analyses the light coming into the camera and it uses that to work out an optimum exposure. So it will give you recommendations on how to set your ISO, aperture, shutter speed so that you'll get a properly exposed image. So we're going to talk more about that as we go through the video. But right now, let's head back to Ladybower and see some more shots that I got on the evening. Okay then, so how do metering modes work in modern digital cameras? Well, first of all, I wouldn't recommend putting your camera into auto mode when trying to experiment with these different metering modes. And that's because most cameras will choose probably something called either matrix or multi or evaluation metering mode when you're in auto. And that's kind of the default setting, but you won't be able to change it probably. And evaluation, multi, matrix metering is absolutely fine. I use that quite a lot most of the time, to be honest. But it is good to be able to change that mode. So take it out of auto, put it into either aperture priority or manual or maybe shutter speed priority mode. And I'm going to refer to this mode as matrix from now on because that's what Nikon call it. But basically what that will do is analyse your entire scene and it'll try and work out an average for all the light areas, maybe in the sky, and the dark areas in the foreground, and it'll give you a balance somewhere in between, and most of the time it's pretty good and it'll do a good job. You've also got center weighted metering mode, where that will focus on the center of your image mainly and try and expose for that area. So if you're doing a portrait, for example, it's really good for that because you're going to have your head probably in the middle of your shot. Then you've got spot metering mode. So this is useful for when you've got more challenging lighting conditions. Perhaps you're taking a sunset shot and you've got people silhouetted in front of that and you want to expose for the sky and not the people. Well, then you can use spot metering, and it will usually work with your focus point. So you move your little focus point into the sky area, for example, and it'll expose for that area. If you wanted to expose for the people instead, you'd move it down to the people and it'd expose for them. So it gives you a little bit more control in your image. And another metering mode that you get in the Nikons, I'm not sure about other camera brands, but it's a slightly more fancy version of matrix metering, where it will expose for the entire scene, but it will try and preserve highlights. It's called highlight metering mode, and it will basically just try and stop your highlights from blowing out. It can be useful. I don't use it a lot, but it can be useful if you're worried about really bright areas and you want to preserve those. In these examples, I'm using aperture priority mode. So you can see here I've got my aperture set to f9, and as I'm moving my focus point around the back of the viewfinder or the screen there, you can see the shutter speed is changing accordingly, and that's because the metering system is evaluating the amount of light coming into the camera and choosing the right shutter speed to create the correct exposure based on me using aperture f9. You can also use manual mode, and when you do that you get a readout on the screen. On Nikons it's on the right, and as you change your parameters such as shutter speed, ISO, aperture, the readout will either go downwards towards the bottom of the screen, that means the image is underexposed, or it will go upwards towards the top of the screen, and that will be overexposed. So you're aiming to be exactly in the centre, and when you're in the middle at 0, that's when you know that your image is technically correctly exposed. So there are some situations, and capturing sunset images is one of those situations, where you're not going to be able to use any of the metering modes in your camera to get a perfect exposure. You'll either get the sky blown out, or your shadows will be too dark, or somewhere in between, and you can't get exactly what you want between the two different areas of your image, the lights and the darks. In that situation, what a lot of people do is use a technique called exposure stacking or bracketing. And I've made videos about this before, so I'm not going to go into it in detail here, but I'll put a link up top to a video if you want to go watch that. But essentially what you do is you take more than one shot. So let's say you take 3, and you might expose 1 for the dark areas in the foreground. You'd make that so you can see the detail in the shadows there, but the sky might be blown out. But that doesn't matter, because you'll take another shot where you're exposed for the sky. So that'll be nicely exposed, it won't be blown out, you'll see all the detail in the sky, but probably everything in the foreground, all that'll be too dark, but again, doesn't matter because you've got the previous shot. And then you might take one in between for some mid-tones, and what you do then is put that into Photoshop or your software of choice, and you can blend those together so that you've got the sky perfectly exposed, the foreground, and everything in between. And it gives you more dynamic range in your image. Sometimes these are called high dynamic range images, and it can look really effective, particularly for landscapes and, like I said, for sunset or sunrise shots. although it is best to try and get your exposure right in camera using the different metering modes, I would recommend shooting in RAW, because if you have messed up slightly or you don't have some of the detail in your image, by shooting in RAW you can pull some of that detail back. And I would recommend exposing for your highlights, so make sure your highlights are not blown out. Don't worry if your shadows are a little bit too dark, because you can pull back the shadows and the detail in those shadows more easily than you can to get the detail back in the highlights. So finally, remember, metering is a really great tool. It can usually help you to get the correct exposure in your image, even in challenging light situations. But it is just a tool, and you don't have to follow it. Perhaps you want your scene to be really dark in the shadows, or you want your highlights to be blown out for some reason. If you're getting artistic and creative, that's fine, it's up to you. And in that case, ignore your metering system or use whatever works for you. But like I said, it is a really great tool, and it's great to master it, to be able to use it if you want to get technically perfect exposed images. Where you can. Like I said, sometimes you can't get perfect exposures. In that case, you might have to rely on bracketing. But that is about it for this video, so a huge thank you for watching. If you have liked the video or found it useful in any way, please just give me a thumbs up down below. And if you've got any comments, I'd love to read those. Share all your knowledge about metering and exposure. Give us some tips. If I haven't covered anything in this video, then do let us know. If you're a regular, massive thanks. I know there are some of you out there who watch every week, and I really, really do appreciate it. I always say that. It always feels a little bit insincere, but I really do mean it. And, you know, the channel, there's no point to doing all this without you people watching, so massive thanks. And if you're not subscribed and you'd like to do so, you can just click down there on the big red button, or over here on this little picture of me, and that way you can stay up to date with what I'm doing each and every week, or not always every week, but every other week usually. And there are videos Sunday mornings at 10 AM UK time. So I hope you can catch me for the next one, but until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.